spokesperson Moloto Mothapo yesterday confirmed that President Cyril Ramaphosa has written to Thandi Modise, the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, communicating to her that Cabinet has taken a decision to intervene in the Northwest. Ramaphosa invokes Section 100, subsection 1 of the Constitution, which stipulates that if a province has failed to fulfill its constitutional obligation to the people, the national government has constitutional powers to intervene by informing the NCOP. Political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe joins us this morning to take this discussion further. Prof, good morning to you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good morning.
A lot has happened in the Northwest province for the past few weeks. A protest, calling on the resignation of Premier Mahumapelo, the Premier coming out promising to resign, and he hasn't resigned as it is now. The decision now taken by President Ramaphosa, would you say that it is the best decision after all that has happened in that province?
Well, let's start by saying one of the obligations of a national executive is to ensure that there's a territorial integrity, that there is a social stability, but there's also, most importantly, provision of services. If, as the Constitution indicates, that there are obligations that are there that the province is failing to fulfill or cannot fulfill, national executive can intervene. So what we've had in the last few weeks has been a sense of mayhem in the Northwest. And that mayhem has escalated into two challenges. One is a collapse of the provision of services, especially in certain departments. And the next one is also the political one. It will seem that the political solution that President Ramaphosa was looking for has not worked, because that requires an engagement at the political level where somebody can willingly step down. So we've seen that that had actually failed, because I think at the provincial level, the discussion were not deep enough. It was the national almost like imposing itself to say this is what will be done. And we saw the resistance politically emerging from the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC. Yeah. But as far as government is concerned, this is where President Ramaphosa came in. But what's also very important is he has taken enough steps to ensure that his act or decision is defensible, in the sense that he put together a team, an interministerial committee, to go and look at the extent of failure by the provincial government to execute those provincial obligations. So after receiving the report, the matter went to Cabinet, and it will seem that Cabinet was satisfied that there should be an intervention. And the intervention goes two ways. There's what you may call soft intervention and a hard one. The soft one is one where the national executive or the president could indicate to the provincial government that what we see here is your failure, but we also suggest this remedial action. Yeah. So that one is not a takeover. It's simply a form of soft supervision. But from reading what is happening, it will seem that he's had to invoke the one that is hard, that says we are actually taking over. Yeah. What we are actually saying is that there will be a supervision by national government.
And this is the first time that national government has had to take over the provincial government, the entire provincial government. But what do you think the solution is to the current problems in that province?
Well, I mean, first of all, there must be articulation that is very clear in terms of each department, what are the weaknesses, because the obligation of and the responsibility of the national executive is to ensure that there's compliance in terms of that, in terms of order, in terms of provision of services. So departments that have collapsed. I mean, if you look at the health department, there is definitely a problem, and there's been going in. So that will determine the extent. But the way it's going to be done, there'll be a task team made of ministers and bureaucrats who understand the system, who will go there to assist. Remember, this is not almost like destroying the leadership that's there, but it's to make sure that there's normalcy or normality in that space, to make sure that there's compliance, to put their processes and to report. And most importantly, there will be regular reports to the NCOP, which will also have to satisfy itself and then make a recommendation to the National Executive. Remember, the interventions are meant to be short-lived. They are not supposed to be permanent. So this is really about the restoration of the governance and administration. Yes. But it does not mean that you have addressed the political element of it.
All right. Now, let's talk about that particular political element. I would imagine this must be a sore spot for the ANC, most importantly towards the 2019 elections.
Well, first of all, there are bigger questions that are being raised. Because protests are common occurrence within South Africa. I mean, we've seen violent protests in Gauteng for almost daily, and in the last week as well. And we've seen other protests in other provinces. So the question that people are asking is that there must be seen to be consistency in how you handle these protests, especially violent ones. The question that is, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions for a president to start getting involved in dealing with those protests? Because if you don't have that, then this can be seen as a way in which people are being purged. And it's very important that this must be seen as restoration of order, restoration of making sure that the province functions and the obligations that are there in the constitution and legislation are adhered to. So that is what is important. But politically, the ANC has always said it is a center. We've seen in the Eastern Cape where the province there, the leadership there, decided to tell the premier who to put in, effectively saying the decision lies with the PEC. Yeah. So the ANC national must be seen to be engaging with the provincial, given also that next year you are going to have national elections. Because if you don't do that, you might have a demobilization of the branches that support the current or chairperson of the province, Supra Mahumapelo. So it is something that is very delicate. Yeah. But most importantly, we should be very careful about the ease with which people can use violent protest to undermine elected structures of the ANC.
Well, we had the Premier saying that the protests were politically motivated. Some ANC members colluding with some EFF members. That is what he said. But let's just talk about the PEC having sort of defied the president and the national office. What are we reading between the lines? Because they came out to say nothing was communicated to them. Hence, they've requested Premier Supra Mahumapelo to take a leave of absence.
I think the national office of the ANC and the NWC must also take responsibility in how this matter was handled. It was not correct for a president to abandon an important meeting in London where he was with the heads of state, where he was with investors, to rush to go and deal with the Northwest without them having dealt with the political realities. So what you saw was a president who flew into a crisis, and effectively it left with the ANC with no other choice to say it is either Supra Mahumapelo or President Ramaphosa. So effectively, when you go towards election, you'll have to protect your leader. But what should have happened, they're actually correct, that it is not a defiance in that sense. It is a defiance in a sense that they're saying there are processes. You know, when you talk about democratic centralism, it does not mean that the top will just impose. What it says that there'll be discussions at the lower level, and they'll be accelerated to the next level, up to the next level. And once a decision is taken, then that is binding. But the people should have been consulted. So the PEC is factually correct and technically correct to say we cannot allow a situation where there's an imposition. This is not a monarchy. This is a democratic constitutional state where there must be deliberations. And this is the lesson that Lutuli House and the NWC and the president must actually learn out of this.
Okay, but what do you think will happen to Supra Mahumapelo? We've had the alliance partners calling to the ANC nationally to sort of convene a task team that will take over the province. Do you think he will go eventually?
Well, I think the die is cast. There is no choice. I mean, even before the game started, I mean, we are just going through the motion. The issue is how do you deal with it in such a way that it is not divisive? How do you deal with it in such a way that it is not seen as purging, but also answering those particular questions that what are the minimum and sufficient conditions before a president can intervene? Otherwise, if you are inconsistent, this will come back to bite you.
All right, Prof, we have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for coming through.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. That was Professor Sipho Seepe. He is a political analyst, of course, discussing the developments in the Northwest province. So the province, as we said, is to be taken over by the national government due to the current political breakdown there. We're taking a quick break here on Morning Live, the Department of Home Affairs under the spotlight when we come back.